by design in a way to win back privacy protections that have been lost due to the development of technology. So I'll give you some examples of things that we're doing, but they're just examples. There are many others out there. One is to have time-based anonymization. And another way of saying that is to say, learn to forget, or program forgetfulness. In other words, it's easier to remember things forever than it is to forget them. It's cheaper to keep things than to delete things, because storage costs are fairly low, and it takes more time and energy from engineers and others to figure out how to get rid of stuff. And yet getting rid of stuff is clearly the right answer in privacy terms, which is why, among other things, we have an anonymization policy for all of our search server logs, for example. Another are privacy controls, so that on social networking sites, people can choose to go private. In other words, to say my blog or my photos or whatever are things that I'm going to restrict just to friends or family. The number of examples of people who put things up on the web, the public web through social networking sites, and then regret it later is legion. And we'll see over time lots more examples of where people will put those pictures where they were drunk at a friend's birthday party online and say, how do I get them back? How do I get them offline? And we all have a responsibility not just to build the tools, which are largely there, but to educate people about the risks of putting information out publicly on the web. And take another example. We're launching Street View now, a project you may have heard about, which is street-level imagery of the cities of the world. So far, it's just the US. But in Europe, when we do launch it, and in the US as we relaunch it, we'll have face detection and face blurring software in place. Software is not perfect. There's an example I already saw. We launched imagery in Manhattan with this face blurring, face detection, face blurring software. And the software had blurred the face of a beautiful horse in Central Park. So you've probably heard of people who have a horsey face. Well, this was a horse that had a face that confused the software into thinking it was human. It's not perfect, but we're improving as it goes along. Location of the data is another of the things that has fundamentally changed in our new world. Traditionally, we used to think about privacy protections as how do you keep the data from leaving my country, for example, or more broadly, leaving Europe. But we just have to face up to the technical realities today that data doesn't really have a location anymore. Why? It's because the cloud architecture that we use, that many other companies on the internet use, and that all of us will be using, that's inevitable, are not geography-based. The information lives in the cloud. And I like the cloud metaphor because you can't pinpoint the location of a cloud. I think that's why they came up with the metaphor. What is it physically? I mean, it's the combination of data centers and proxies and relays and all of the devices that are connected to the internet that are the location of data. So we have to have regimes to protect privacy that don't depend on location. That means we have to amend quite a bit of the traditional regulatory superstructure that we have developed in the past decades and adapt that to this new world. Canada, I think, did a particularly far-sighted approach to that by saying, look, privacy protections and responsibilities apply to the companies, the controllers, if you will, that collect information. And those responsibilities don't change based on where they hold the data. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that is probably the right role for us all going forward. If we think about privacy regulation, and we are here, after all, in a public policy think tank environment, there are quite a number of ways that we can work together to improve the regulatory approach to protecting privacy. Some countries in Europe, not Ireland, still have traditions of mandatory per database notifications with the data protection authorities. I don't think the concept of a per database notification has any meaning anymore in our world, in the world of the internet, where we all live with umpteen databases ourselves. That's just a lot of paperwork, and I think that actually brings the broader regulatory structure into disrespect when it's based on things that are so obsolete. So we just need to fix that. Again, not in Ireland, but in quite a number of European countries. And I think there needs to be a lot of focus on harms. Harms as a concept for regulatory engagement. And that's something that's very hard to define in the world of the internet. I'll give you a couple examples as we go along. Another thing that isn't really working all that well, and I'm facing up to really the hard problems here, at least as I see them, for privacy on the internet, is notice. the whole industry uses this model of privacy policies, right? The little thing that you click on and then up comes this legalistic document that is often very hard for people to read. And even if they did read it, not many do, even if they did, it's dubious how much useful information that really provides to people. And I think the responsibility of us in industry in this new world is to experiment with new formats of providing this information. I don't have the answer, but I can say some of the experiments that we're playing with are launching a series of videos. We've launched over 20 little videos on YouTube, but YouTube's open to anybody, so feel free to launch your own. That user will click on something and up pops a human being, in our cases, real Google employees, who will explain something in simple language to the average internet user about privacy and whatever the topic is. So for example, we've launched videos about things like privacy and cookies, or privacy and authenticated search. And we've had 500,000 people look at these videos so far. They've only been out for a few months. I think that's a very gratifying number. 500,000 people watching a video that doesn't include, Britney Spears or juggling monkeys is, pretty positive thing. These are very serious videos, and they're meant to be simple. I think in the future what we're going to see is we're going to see online services that have a lot of just-in-time links to little video information. People relate better to a human being speaking to them and giving them really basic and essential information than they do to, here's a link to a privacy policy that you can go off and read. And maybe there are other approaches that will work well, and I just hope to see a lot more experimentation in the industry to address this, because it really is a very difficult topic. Clearly the world is more global now, and we have to come up with global privacy standards. As Google, we've been doing a lot of work in a number of different forums to try to advance the cause of global privacy standards. I'll give you a few examples of that. One, in the United States, where there's a highly fragmented federalistic privacy regime, 50 different states with 50 different approaches, we think it makes a lot of sense, and so do other industry leaders, to have one federal privacy law in the United States. That would be progress. Think about today, there are 39 security breach laws in the United States, and they're all slightly different from each other. That's a very difficult situation if you're a company doing business on the internet. And likewise around the world, we have different models. There's the APEC model, which is still somewhat embryonic, but is very promising in terms of developing privacy protections and regimes, especially in countries that don't themselves have a tradition of that. After all, it is more than the majority of countries in the world that do not have any tradition of privacy regimes. And so it's not about importing or exporting any particular model, but it's about encouraging a consistency and harmonization of approaches so that all of this works on the internet. Just to say a word about this broader question about government access to information, it's one of the topics that I think will interest people here in Dublin and was on the agenda. Without getting into the debate about whether data retention makes sense or doesn't make sense, without touching the political aspect of it or the cost-benefit aspect of it, I just want to make a couple observations about it from the point of view of a global service provider. We offer webmail, we offer chat services. All of these are global services offered over the internet. People can access and use them from just about any country in the world. And we have users in Ireland and all across Europe, of course. The problem is that those rules will not be implemented in a harmonized fashion across Europe. The directive itself allowed different member states to choose retention periods ranging from a minimum of 6 months to a maximum of 24. And indeed, we are seeing different countries propose different time periods. To take some examples, Germany's proposing 6, France and Ireland for internet data 12, Ireland for communications, I understand, 24, the Netherlands 18. So you see the numbers are all over the map.